QSO Today, episode 347, Patrick Brown, AK5TX. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that the great outdoors is calling. Get outside and under the stars with the new ICOM IC705 all-band portable transceiver, now shipping from your favorite amateur radio dealer. And by LDG Electronics, whose desktop antenna tuners are perfect for your ham shack or mobile. More later. My thanks to ICOM America and now LDG Electronics for their support of the QSO Today podcast. The QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo that began on March 15th is now closed. Not to worry, though, because all of the presentations will be available through the Expo website. Just click on the link that will take you to the presentation videos. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth4Z1UG, your host. Patrick, Pat Brown, AK5TX, has always had a love for radio, leading to opportunities from Minnesota to Alaska. Amateur radio was the game changer for Pat when he suddenly lost his eyesight almost 20 years ago. Pat is now handycapable and continues to contribute to his amateur radio community in Tyler, Texas, and to our amazing hobby. AK5TX is my QSO Today. AK5TX, this is Eric 4Z1UG. Are you there, Patrick?
Yes, Eric, this is Pat, AK5TX. It's my vanity call sign, and AK is Alaska, 5 is our zone in Texas, and TX is to Texas, so I like to say Alaska to Texas.
It sounds like a very nice integration. Pat, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Let's start at the beginning of your ham radio story. When and how did it start for you?
When I think about ham radio, that was kind of evolution, I guess would be the term to use, because I was always interested in electricity and electronics, and growing up in the 60s, it was still kind of a novelty to a lot of people. And there were the kits, Hallicrafters and a few others. But I'd have to say that my first real experience with communication occurred when my dad got me a tape recorder, a battery-operated tape recorder, and I discovered that if you could put a speaker out there, you could use it like a PA system. So we had this old flimsy tree, and I put the speaker in there, and when people go by, I would get to say things like, "Hello, how you doing?" And they thought it was a talking tree. But that's from there, it evolved when CB was very popular in the 60s. And from there, I've had some experiences involved with CB and emergency communications, and learned about Mars radio for the military communications during the Vietnam War. And then later, I went ahead and received a initial license. I was technician class back then. What ended up happening was I was fascinated with the idea that you could talk not only across the street, but around the world. And I became also an avid shortwave radio listener. So between those two, it was absolutely fascinating to me to be able to hear and speak with people from around the world and share common interest and just learn about places and lands and peoples. And that fascination has always stayed with me ever since. And I, to this day, thoroughly enjoy meeting new people and learning about new places.
Let's stay back there for a second in the 60s. The transition from CB radio through Mars to an amateur radio license, that's usually kind of led by a mentor or an Elmer or something like that. Was that the case with you?
No, I was honestly disappointed with the ham club in my area because everyone said they were too busy to help me with my license. It was a crushing blow, and I did what I could to try to adapt. And that's why later in life, I've created an opportunity for people to learn and enjoy ham radio that I never had. And back then you had to know the code, and there wasn't anyone to feel that they had the time or energy to delegate or mentor or coach or help, or what we call Elmers. That is where seasoned hams help new at novice or younger hams. And so I could say it could have left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I learned from that experience, and I learned to do research. And I will thank the ARRL, because back then the only resource we really had was the ARRL handbook. And in it, it had all these different topics and things that I needed to learn and understand. And it was absolutely wonderful. So it was kind of my solace in the midst of the other situations.
How old were you in this period?
This was elementary grades, grade 6, and then my junior, what we call junior high school years of 7th and 8th grade.
And where did you find the ARRL handbook? Was that in the school library?
Yes, it was in our school library. And after talking to the head librarian, she even went ahead and ordered a couple extra copies so that they made sure they had the latest edition, and then also checked into magazines or other related ham gear and equipment, and even got some of the catalog companies. So it was nice that because I was on a very meager budget, I couldn't afford to purchase these at that time relatively expensive media and materials. And so the library became kind of my home away from home, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And, now today the ARRL has expanded and offers such wonderful resources. I'm also a great advocate for the home team, as we say.
What was the hometown?
I was in Gary, Indiana in the 60s, but we did a lot of activities in Chicago, including I was a radio announcer, had my own program, assistant radio manager.
When you got your technician class license, how old were you?
I have trouble remembering since of my lightning strike accident, but I think I was 13 at that time and had to go into the FCC office in Chicago in order to do the testing. They didn't have volunteer testing or local areas at that time.
And do you remember your first call sign?
No, I don't, but later I did have KL3DB. That was later in life. And of course, now my vanity call sign AK5TX.
So you're a relatively young ham. Did the school also have like electronics courses, or did you have other friends that shared your radio interest?
No, they did not. Back in the 60s, it cost $30 extra to take a computer class, and I didn't have $30 extra. So I didn't get to take that class. And in our school, that was the only so-called technology. But later, there is a educational FM radio station, WGVE, which was at the school, and it was approximately 5 watts and went up to 10 watts of power. And I spent all my time indentured myself to it to learn about radio. And the engineer, a very gracious man, was kind enough to give me some source materials and also teach me a little about radio stations. And for that, I'm extremely grateful.
Now, did you have a first rig in those days?
The first rig I had was I can't remember, it was a big green box with big dials on it. It was, it wasn't Helicrafters, but it was another brand. It was a Heathkit. I was terrible and atrocious at soldering and wiring, and I trashed my first unit, but Heathkit graciously provided me a new kit. And later, the teacher from the radio station actually helped me be able to complete it. And he taught me some simple soldering techniques and things like that. And it worked, I have to say. And there was no smoke coming out the box.
Your first license was a technician license, or was it a novice license? Was this a novice rig?
It was a novice rig, but I had a technician license because at that time you had to know code, and I wasn't that proficient yet. And only later did I discover that there were hams and individuals that offered courses on cassette in order to learn code. So I was kind of behind the curve, but I appreciated what I did have and enjoyed some simple conversations. And my rig was only about 5 or 6 watts. But, you know, with an antenna, that was sufficient to reach around. And on those clear, crisp nights, I could get some pretty far off stations and chat for a couple of seconds with other individuals.
Was that a transceiver that Heathkit?
Yes, it was that's the simple transceiver. Normally it was $119, and I got it on sale for like $59 because I think it was a discontinued model. But it met all my needs, and I had it for several years. But over the years, it's been gone. And in fact, I ended up doing some modifications on it, which I might tell you about a little later.
Was that the HW16?
I can't remember the model number, but that sounds about right. It was the old tube filled.
Yeah, it had like 3 tubes in the transmitter and maybe 5 tubes in the receiver.
Yep, and I love the smell of ozone. And when it was cold, I put my hand on top to keep my hands warm. So it worked out. It was a fine unit, multi-purpose.
It was a fine rig. I remember it. Okay, so what's the current rig?
Currently, I have a ICOM 2-meter setup, and I also have a Kenwood. And the problem is Kenwood always, and all these companies use such small type that it's difficult. But I have the TS480, and I would like to say a shout out to the main trading company here in Texas, because they graciously applied a grant to me and allowed me to get my rigs after I had some very great challenges. And so I'm able to get on the air, and my local ham club has been wonderful in supporting me and helping me get my antennas up and running also.
Did ham radio then play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Oh, absolutely. When I was in high school, you had to do a term paper. It had to be 12 pages long, single space type, and all those things that about put me to sleep. But I ended up doing it on ham radio. And so not only did I learn about the history of ham radio, but I got to actually practice and study for my testing. And I was going for my general at that time. And the only comment I got back on my report, which was a B-, was that this should be a commercial.
For amateur radio.
Yes. So it was very gracious, because this teacher didn't hand out compliments, but I survived. I learned the radio. And then during the Vietnam War, my uncle, he was a sergeant who served in very capacities. And I discovered only years later, after his passing, that he was into some, I don't know the exact term, but he did communications. And so he taught me some tips, trips, and techniques for a radio. And I have to say that was a fun time. We got to not only bond, but do some fun things with radio.
Now, when you graduated from high school, did you go on to school? What period was this? And was the war over by this point?
This was 1972. I graduated from high school, and that was the last year that they did the draft. My number was pulled, but I did not have to, so to speak, show up to do the testing and enter in the service. Later, I found out that my health wasn't sufficient for me to properly serve our military, so I did what I call the other side of the coin. I became a defense contractor and contributed on some projects that were very successful and used later by our military as part of the different opportunities. But right out of high school, I was considering going to Purdue University in Indiana. That's where Armstrong went to school, Neil Armstrong. And I thought, I want to be just like the astronauts. But instead, 2 radio stations hired me. And so I was flung into the Chicago radio market, and they had to, the one boss said, Pat, you got to come up with that catchy phrase. So this is my official catchy phrase. You're listening to Smiling Pat, the most recognized voice in the Windy City, Chicago. And he liked that. And then the other one wanted me to do a talk show, but he didn't. He pulled me from it because he said I wasn't contentious enough. And so I don't know whether to be offended or complimented complimented, but because I wasn't contentious enough, I didn't make it on talk radio. So I stuck to news, weather, sales, and broadcasting behind the scenes. And at that time, our transmitters were atop the Sears Tower, which is now the Willis Building, and also the other tower, which was located in the John Hancock Center. So I got to spend many a wonderful time sightseeing. And the scariest time was we were up there when a storm front rolled through Chicago, and it was the first time I'd ever been on a skyscraper that was swaying, and they said it was swaying approximately 3 feet, and it seemed like 3 miles wide. And when you look down, the clouds below you were discharging lightning, and that was one of the most scary, awesome, pump the adrenaline things I've ever incurred. And after radio, I moved up into Minnesota and started going into more of the technical side with computer companies and defense contractors. So it was a wonderful compliment. And in fact, my chief engineer for the radio station was a ham radio operator himself. And so throughout my life and my course of events, there have been these wonderful people that popped up to kind of give me course correction and kind of encourage me on along the way. And for that, I'm extremely grateful.
And now this message from ICOM America. I can already feel spring in the air, and the great outdoors is calling. Get outside under the stars with one of ICOM's ultimate SDR transceivers. Stay connected while off the grid. The ICOM IC705 is the perfect transceiver for hams who enjoy both a great indoors and outdoors. It's the perfect QRP companion with base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters, and is weighing in at just under 2 pounds. These features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall, 5 watts with a BP272 battery pack, or 10 watts with an external 13.8 DC power supply, single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions, a micro USB connector, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, and an SD card slot, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger. The HM243 speaker microphone is standard equipment. The basic accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations or a day social distancing in the park. Visit the IC705 webpage to view accessories and free software available for download. If you lean to the VHF and above region, then you can create your own band opening with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver radio brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy. These features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD with real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. I believe it is the most exciting VHF and above transceiver on the market today. And finally, the ICOM IC7300 is the most advanced HF transceiver in its price class and ideal for the new ham or the experienced ham looking for an upgrade. The ICOM IC7300's high-performance innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages to reduce the generated inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 is the radio that changed the way entry-level HF is designed, and I own one and I think it's brilliant. Its features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. The real HF fun starts at ICOM. Be sure to buy one of these fine ICOM transceivers at your favorite ham radio dealer, and when you do it, tell them that you heard about it here at QSO Today. And now, back to our QSO. In your message to me, you said that you were involved in underground radio in the 60s in Chicago. What is underground radio? Sounds to me like you were quite above ground.
Oh, well, I laugh because even now my heart's beating faster and I'm sitting up straighter in my chair. That old ham radio I talked about, I modified it. And so I began broadcasting my underground AM and FM radio station. And I received a summons to report to the FCC field office in Chicago. And so when I showed up, I found out that my underground FM radio station, that is to say it wasn't properly licensed, was detected, and that they wanted it abruptly stopped. And the head of the office, the head administrator, the director of the Chicago field office came out to talk with me. And he says, "Young man," and I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Do you know how we found you?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "The State Department contacted us." And I stopped and I thought, why would the State Department be listening to my radio station? And he says, "You're probably wondering why." He says, "Your third harmonic is the frequency for Radio China, and the State Department was monitoring and discovered your clandestine station and were wondering if you were a spy." I'm like, "No, sir." So he says, just very abruptly, "I don't ever want to hear your signal or your name mentioned again. Is that understood?" I said, "Yes, sir." So I have to say, in conclusion, to this day, at an undisclosed location in the bottom of Lake Michigan is an old radio station that has been put to rest, and I'm afraid to go look for it anymore.
So you went to Minnesota, and you began to work for a defense contractor. What did you do there?
I worked for, at that time, the term was Sperry Univac. It was later purchased by Burroughs. And we worked on weapon systems and guidance systems. And I was in part of the research and development testing section. So some of the systems that we were familiar with is called core memory. And that is where you have a series of magnets and wires. So if you have a power failure, it's able to, so to speak, freeze in place and retrace the last steps of the computer program. And then we had what was called fire control stations. And this is the term for the systems that energize and launch different systems, such as the Phalanx close-in weapons on the Trident sub or other projects like that. And then there was this brand new material called optic fibers. And I had never heard of it, but we had a spool that was 200 miles long, and you could put it up to your eye and put the other end on like a nickel, and you could see all the detail. And so they told us, they said, break it. He says, you can't use a knife on it, but see if you can break it. So we had beams overhead, and we strung it over, and this was 3/8 inch fiber optic. This was at the time they were launching the space shuttle kind of era. And we were swinging from the rafters, and we couldn't stretch it. It was totally flexible. And at the end, it provided 100% transmission rates. And since then, it has evolved into, more robust and sophisticated communications cable. But that was so much fun. Here we are, grown men swinging like a trapeze on this stuff. And, a guy said, "I can still see the nickel."
How did you end up going to Alaska?
From Minnesota, Burroughs bought the company out and basically closed our division down. And so I was offered a position with Boise Cascade in International Falls, Minnesota, which is on the Fort Francis border with Canada, where they did a plant facility upgrade. And I helped with engineering and implementation on their energy, wastewater recovery, those provisions. And then once that project was finished, I had received an offer to move to Alaska. And this was at the time of the Exxon oil spill, where there was suddenly a great need and influx of trained personnel. So I began working at a sawmill in Seward, Alaska, and later worked for various companies, including the construction companies and the service companies that worked on the pipeline. And so in addition to that, I also had stints with other companies such as fish processing maintenance, and gold mines. So I like to say I had the adventures of Jack London and live to tell about it. But Alaska is such a amazing and adventuresome land. And as a ham radio operator up in Alaska, I did volunteer work with HARP. Some people know about it, some don't. But it was a research project for the high altitude aurora. And one of the remarkable byproducts of that research was we had real-time monitoring of the different layers, the F layers, the E layers, the D layers. So when you had your ham radio station going, you could pick optimum conditions real time instead of having to kind of, look online or kind of spin the dial and look around or try different bands. And since then, HARP has been shut down and the University of Fairbanks has purchased it, and they're looking to revamp it and get it up and running. And so in addition to studying the Northern Lights phenomena, we're hoping, I still have contacts up there, we're hoping to do some additional research, including earthquake prediction and some other seismic events based on inflections of the frequencies of the Earth. So it all is a wonderful and exciting activities. And I love earth science, especially studying about earthquakes and other phenomena like that.
What happened in Alaska that changed your life?
Well, Alaska altered my life in a couple of different wonderful and tragic ways. I had lost my vision suddenly on a Friday morning. It was May 16, 2008. And what ended up happening is I woke up and couldn't see a thing. And I have to say that really messed up my weekend. But having suffered vision loss, I had some operations and procedures and ended up receiving partial restoration of my vision. And I hate to say it this way, but it was such a dark time for me. And I became very despondent, and I spent my first 90 days locked up in my apartment. I never went outside. And finally, and I say by the grace of God, I got a flash of inspiration of life and said, this is not you. And so I got up and started doing things and investing in the lives of others. And I have to say that ham radio has been my redeeming factor. My life was limited to the length of my cane. And we're told that you're supposed to introduce your cane like, it's a person or something. But if you ever meet her, it's Candy Cane. So everyone has a cane name. There's, Cane Mutiny and, anyway. But it allowed me to come out of myself and, again, starting to interact with the world. And through that, I did meet a contact of a fine lady. Her name is Shanley. And in fact, the local radio station did a program called Love on the Airwaves, where we talk about our story of meeting in Alaska. And she lived in Homer, which is down on the Spit, and I lived up in Wasilla, which is above Anchorage. And the commuting didn't work out as much as we wanted to, especially since I couldn't drive. And so we ended up with a wonderful relationship and getting married and moving to Homer, where we began a ham radio club. And in addition to that, we taught classes. And so together, I like to say we helped nearly 100 individuals go beyond curiosity to motivation to obtaining their licenses. And our club was complimented by the ARRL as having one of the highest percentages of extra class operators on file, which is a great and high honor that we received because of the compliments and the support of the people involved. And it was wonderful.
After your loss of vision, how did you compensate for that loss and then applied it to amateur radio and to your life?
Well, if I say that I was stumbling around in the dark, my doctor would say, Pat, you broke your toe 7 times and your foot 3 times crashing into stuff. So you've got to learn to negotiate a little bit better. So now I wear clogs and I'm a little more careful. You get set in your ways and you get independent and you get where you refuse help because of pride. And I think that was the first thing that I had to acknowledge was that, I'm not the best person. And yes, I do need resources to help me. And in response to that, I've had such loving support and encouragement. And with ham radio, different groups, different peoples, different individuals have come forward to help me meet my mission. And my mission was to make ham radio adaptive. As you know, during a earthquake or other disaster, typhoon on that side of the world, and down here we have the tornadoes and hurricanes, last people on the list to get their services and support have always been what is called the disabled people, or today the PC correct term is individuals in the vulnerable community. But the bottom line is that there are people who we need to support and check on. And so one of our missions was to help with what was called CERT training, community emergency response teams and training, to help people be prepared themselves and then to help their family and to help in their community. So it built a wonderful camaraderie. And through those kinds of activities, I am very blessed to say that I've got many, many acquaintances of people around the world now, including having worked and supported groups like the Lions Club, Toastmasters, Sertoma for hearing health, and National Federation of the Blind, where they learn that there's more to life than just what was in the past. And Alaska actually had a radio service called ARIES, which was a system that I helped volunteer at, where we would just talk to people like we're talking now, Eric, and tell our stories and hear stories and share news. And mostly it was for those folks who felt isolated, that we could just be a friendly voice in the midst of some troublesome times. And, I look at then compared to now, and it's like, this is a whole magnitude higher level. So definitely there's going to be some more, but it was wonderful. And when I talk about the ham story, I have to go ahead and finish it, because after 5 years, my wife, Shanley, KL5AJK SK, came down to Texas. She was a girl that was born in Athens and a Texas teacher. And she says, we need to move, which we did. It says, would you like to go to Texas? And I said, sure, let's go to Texas. So in 2017, she came down here, scoped out a job and a place. And at that time, they were spraying for the Zika virus. And both her and her aunt caught this influenza, they called it, that was going around. And my wife returned to Alaska to pass away a week later. And, that was hard. And so having committed to moving to Texas, my daughter graciously put her life on hold and helped me get down here. And so it's a new chapter for me. And that's why I changed my call sign, AK5TX. And so it's Alaska's a land of great beauty and also great tragedy at times. And mine incorporated one of those sides of the story.
I'm so sorry for your loss. I can only imagine. But it seems to me, though, you're saying a number of things here that I think are maybe important to emphasize, and that is that there are opportunities for people with disabilities, even vision-impaired people, in CERT and in ARES?
Absolutely. I was actually, during our CERT training, I was a CERT commander, and they would report to me, and all I needed was a bigger board. They use a dry erase board in order to monitor different statistics and things like that. Well, I couldn't see it. So someone went out and got me a 4-foot by 6-foot board, and we put larger letters on there, and I could effectively communicate and coordinate it. And you'll appreciate the humor, Eric, is because as a part of CERT training, the final exercise is where they do a simulation of an event. And you have to go in and check for wounded and, rescue the dying and all this. And so our local high school theatrics club got involved. Now, when I say involved, I mean involved. They went out and they got the fake blood and the fake guts and the fake hearts. And when you went in and you found somebody, you had to really think, are they really okay? And it was so realistic that we washed out about 5% of the team because they couldn't handle the scenario. And oh my gosh, how are they going to handle the real thing? But yet there are ways they could serve. But when we talk about becoming involved, I like to say that, I hate the term disabled, and I've coined this moniker. We are more than able, we are handy-capable. And everyone has resources and gifts and something they can do. And everyone can contribute something, especially in times of emergency when we need to pool all our resources together. And one person who was blind during our emergency EOC, they do a large statewide event. His job was he walked around passing out bottles of water, asking people how they're doing, making sure everybody was okay. So you can't limit what you can or can't do. Although I will say that when you're doing the dog mushing, and you're doing what's called checkpoints, and they come through and they've got their number, and you got to, acknowledge that they made it to your checkpoint. Since then, they've installed RFID chips so that there's a scanner, kind of like the barcode scanner you might see at a store. So they can zing by and you can coordinate that and it prints it out. So simple tasks like that, technology has increased to help us to live a higher quality of life. And for that, I'm very grateful.
In other words, what you're saying, in the 21st century, in the West, mostly perhaps, that people's disabilities are really limited to what they're thinking, not that there isn't opportunity in order to overcome those limitations and be a part of the team.
I would say it's a little different than that. It's more correctly, from my observations as a disability advocate, it's what other people's perception of your disability and what you can and can't do. And the classic example is when I'm job hunting and I say I am blind, everyone thinks of Helen Keller. And while it was true, Helen Keller was totally blind and she was totally deaf, she did learn to use an electric shoehorn, which is on display at the American Council for the Blind, and she would do Morse code and people would respond in Morse code. So she learned to communicate using Morse code to be able to function and actually become one of the greatest spokespersons for people with disabilities. And today, there is more opportunity. It's just that my main mission is education to people who have a perception of what disability means. And it's just a matter of education. And I find that most folks, once they gain a little bit of understanding, they're kind of take the old deep breath. Oh, I didn't know that. So it works out. It's mutually beneficial. And the bottom line is that we are seeing more people with disabilities participating in our environment. And actually, the disability community is growing. It's about 40 million now, and it will be growing larger because of the aging baby boomers, our wounded warriors. And the number one problem for sight loss right now is diabetes due to people drinking too much soda or pop, depending on what part of the country you're in, and losing their vision because of the diabetes reactions. So the challenges are greater than ever, but the opportunities and businesses are now starting to embrace those technologies that will enable people to not be contributing a job like a handout, but providing their expertise to be able to provide profitability to their company and meaningful outcomes. And so for that, I'm very encouraged by it. And I never get tired of saying this is our day and this is our time.
Let me take a quick break to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, and that's the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and it now includes Michael Walker, VA3MW, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. The group documents their projects and makes circuit boards available to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Jeremy may complain about the overall length of the podcast, but friends, let me tell you that I could listen to it all day, and that's good. Even if you are a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George, Jeremy, and Mike now for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast on every podcast player. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO Today. What was Project Leon, or what is Project Leon?
I have always been fascinated by rockets, rocket technology, and things that go kablam and boom in space. Growing up in the 60s, of course, was the great space race. And the culmination was July 20, 1969, when on my birthday, on my 15th birthday, man landed on the moon and Neil Armstrong set foot. And it was, one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. And being on a modest budget, I began rocketry when I was in elementary grade. And a lot of people will know what they call the Estes rockets. And these are rockets that you build yourself, little ones, and they are powered by a solid rocket motor, kind of like a flare with a controlled burn, and it can shoot them up in the sky, varying altitudes. And I even had water-powered rockets and was working on some novel technologies. And today they have, as an example, water-powered rockets with about a 200 PSI thrust that can send them up to 1,500 feet into the air. So I've always wanted to get things up there. And I always wondered, I wonder if there's a way we could communicate. So when Arthur C. Clarke came up with his idea about satellites and the satellite network, he didn't get it patented. Otherwise, he would have been, the ultra billionaire, because every satellite up there would have had to pay him royalties. But I've always had that mission about how can we communicate and improve communication, because people love to talk and love to listen. And so back in the 60s, we were just coming out with new styles of transistors. I worked for a computer company in the 70s called Control Data, where we were building faster computers with multi-layered, and then defense contractors such as Sperry, where we were building multi-layered PC boards. And communications continued. Instead of the tubes, we started getting transistor-powered units and later ICs. And the question is, how do you get those satellites up there? So I did independent research, and in the mid 90s, I discovered there were several groups, several nations, and several corporations that were doing technology called the RAM accelerator. And the RAM accelerator is basically a system to provide rapid oxidation and to attain some amazing speeds, including escape velocities. And so if you put it in a tube, and it just has to be a tube similar to something like the oil pipeline, nothing super spectacular. And when you fill it with the light gases, we used hydrogen, methane, and some other mixtures and other combinations. And then upon ignition, it creates a shock wave. And everyone laughs and thinks of the Charlie Brown cartoon where Snoopy rides the surf on this surfboard. Well, that's kind of the image that you can have, where your aeroshell, which contains your components, is at the front end at the back end of the tube. And when it is ignited, it surfs the front of the shock wave and immediately obtains hypersonic velocities and is able to accelerate. And you're able to accelerate that to sufficient velocities to escape the atmosphere, and you can park your equipment in low Earth orbit network. And the one main advantage that ours had over other technologies was that it was a magnitude cost cheaper, and also 90% of the weight of a spacecraft is the weight of the fuel that it has to take with it to burn. Well, we don't have to do that. So a 200-pound aeroshell can deliver the payload that a $60, $80 million, $100 million rocket project can, and we can do it for a magnitude cost less. And the struggle has been, since I've been involved with a particular research project since 1999 has been to educate people properly to invest in it. And I have some, caveats of interest to tell some stories perhaps another time. But the bottom line is that everyone is hoping that there's another alternative. But I have been given FAA approval because the technology we use, specifically the rocket fuel, is non-polluting. So we don't have to do the environmental impact studies and waste years of time trying to justify it. And the Kodiak launch site in Alaska was looking at it at one time so that you had a, downrange safety factor. But there'd been expressed interest to relocate it to Florida. But I kind of like Texas. And so I smile when I say that Elon Musk has moved here also, because we kind of have the same vision. And I have to acknowledge, and I take my hat off with all due respect, Elon Musk is a little farther along in his satellite project than I am, but happiness and success to his project. And we have an application, and perhaps we'll fill in the gap one day for meeting on-demand redundant systems. And so I'm not discouraged by it. It's just a wonderful, it's been a rewarding career studying this all these years and seeing how things are evolving. So Project Leon, shoot things into space.
Pat, what's the objection to Project Leon? Then it seems to me that this is an amazing thing, that you could actually put a CubeSat or CubeSats into order for an order of magnitude less than it costs now, even with Elon Musk's Falcon rockets. What's the objection?
I have discovered the objection is that they don't feel they would make enough profit as compared to the traditional proven rocket technologies. And as an example, I have the PopCan launcher, which can launch a PopCan-sized CubeSat. We have the Mini-Me, which I admit is the takeoff of something that can launch a 200-pound satellite. And then we have the Mighty Mo, which can launch the 2,000-pound satellites about the size of a Volkswagen. And Bigelow was interested at one time in launching his Space Habitats, which is a 10-foot wide by 40-foot long container that would be launched into low Earth orbit effort. And for about $1 billion, we could build the launch tube that could successfully launch these space habitats for science and research. The university market for the CubeSats has a waiting list of 5 years and maybe only 200 units to 500 units going up in a season. Well, we could meet that launch on demand, but I've honestly have just not found the right team to work with that's willing to help me along the journey. But I have spoken with the AMSAT folks and the different organizations involved with amateur radio. And my initial goal was on the 100th anniversary of ham radio, which is passed. We were wanting to put up a couple of CubeSats for promoting amateur radio, but the details didn't work out. But that's okay. We'll come up with the next milestone to go forward.
And now this message from LDG Electronics. LDG Electronics, our new sponsor, is a family-owned company that manufactures sophisticated antenna tuners, baluns, and antenna accessories. Check out their new Z100A antenna tuner for your shack or portable operation that includes LDG's famous 10-to-1 tuning and plug-and-play operation. For more information, click on the banner in this week's show notes page. And when you make your LDG purchase, tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. You mentioned that you focus on STEM.
STEM and STEAM. STEM refers to science, technology, engineering, and math. And STEAM is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And the purpose is that our school systems are really struggling, and our students are incapable many times of competing in the global world markets. As the economics is showing, manufacturing and processing where the dominant countries are and their personnel. So the country as a whole has kind of taken a deep breath and said, we need to focus on that. And so part of the next generation plan that I'm doing is STEM and STEAM education via ham radio. And you can pick any discipline, any hobby, any craft, any activity, art, science, and it's related to ham radio. And what my goal is to take that interest into a motivation, into a curiosity, and a lifetime learning process with solutions to help. And definitely, there's plenty of room for prosperity with solutions in the economy.
What's Pat's Wheel of Fortune?
Pat's Wheel of Fortune is different from another Pat and another Wheel of Fortune, which is out there. They're not to be confused. Pat's Wheel of Fortune is my copyrighted game, and it is a wheel that you get. It's a small wheel. It can be a home version, and you spin the wheel, and there are categories. In particular, I have a version I call Pat's Ham Radio Wheel of Fortune. And in those categories is the question pool of our different classes of licenses, whether it's a technician, general, or extra class. And it takes fun into learning instead of having to barrage yourself with endless activities and formulas and mind-numbing information. It allows you in a fun, creative, and exciting way to interact and learn. And as a part of that, I have adapted the Wheel of Fortune to other disciplines, and I'm actually having support from a school system that provides curriculum. And so we're looking at adapting it for STEAM and STEM education. As an example, teach the alphabet, simple words, blended sounds, especially for students who have disabilities, all the way up to advanced topics such as chemistry, physics, and astrophysics. So any topic can be broken down into these categories and have some good old-fashioned fun doing it. I will say that I had a cable company that was interested in going full bore for a full-time program and had named a couple of notorieties, but with the outbreak of the COVID and the pandemic, they canceled those projects. So someday soon, you might see Smiling Pat with his Wheel of Fortune, and the goal is just to have fun while learning and get back to the joy of education.
What's your favorite ham radio club?
My favorite ham radio club currently is TARC, Tyler Amateur Radio Club, where I currently serve as vice president and captain of education and training. And I give them a shout out because wherever I go and whichever clubs I end up joining and belonging to, they're also my favorite clubs. But I hate to say it, I can't join them all, but I stay in touch with them and have expressed a great appreciation. There's probably about 15 or 20 Texas clubs that I stay in touch with, and Louisiana clubs in Oklahoma and one in Arkansas. So and even the one back in Alaska. So I enjoy the art of conversation and the fun that goes with it, and hearing their stories and the exciting adventures that we have, all because of this hobby, craft, art, and science we call amateur radio.
Have you seen that TARC had an increase in membership as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
The answer is yes. With my courses, we had about a dozen people go forward and get their licenses. What we were forced to do here in Texas is go to the Zoom meetings, and it was awkward, as in any first application of getting used to it. But now we're having what we call blended meetings, where we will meet in person, or if you have any concerns or reservations, we're also providing it on Zoom. And so the goal is, whatever your comfort factor is, you can still participate in our ham club. And we're actually getting ready not only for our elections, but for field day coming up in June and for our potluck. And so we were going over at our recent board meeting some of the logistics necessary. So we're trying to get folks back and involved and encouraged. And definitely we all need encouragement in these days.
Now, I'm just curious, Texas is kind of now open. So are you back to live board meetings, or did you find over the last year that using video conferencing technology like Zoom has made it easier for the group to get together to settle its business?
It actually makes it easier because of our diverse schedules and work activities. And as things have evolved, mostly hams who are a little more tech savvy, I guess is the term to use. Everyone now has a home computer or a work computer. And so we'll have different board members in different aspects of activities. And one of our board members, I hate to say the term, got the COVID, but he was really struggling there. And the meetings were something of a comfort to where he could just, be included.
What do you think the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now is?
Boy, I have been pondering that for about the last year. And the reason why I say that is I don't get out a whole lot, and I'm considered a high-risk disabled individual. So my doctor pretty much put me on, I don't want to say house arrest, but he says, you want to be very wise about going out. And so ham radio was an outlet for me, a wonderful outlet. And all of a sudden that was all restricted. And so the art of amateur radio is about communication. And so my ponderings, if that's the term to use, is to come up with creative ideas of increasing that communications and participation. And I have been asked to create lessons that can be seen on, a podcast or activity, or come up with other creative ideas. And a part of that is that I created a Pat's Ham Radio, Accurite Weather, and Science Club. And so we are trying to actively promote interaction of our senior ham operators, who we call Elmers, to convey and teach and participate with younger people. I've gone to schools and school systems and private clubs to like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and others to encourage them about the features and benefits and fun of ham radio. So I see more of our need to be a catalyst in our communities. And there's what's considered the 5 benchmarks or the 5 principles or the 5 pillars of ham radio. And one of them is being an ambassador of goodwill. And boy, in this day and age, if we ever needed to help communicate some goodwill and promote, community participation and inclusiveness, these are those days. And so I'd like to say that if I could have my wish on my wish list, we could see the success of other groups. But I wanted to give a big shout out, Eric, to your ham convention, your ham nation, your wonderful activity to be able to events that we love to used to go to, where there'd be hundreds or several thousands of hams getting together and meeting and talking and seeing things. You had to go virtual, and I participated in it in the sense that I was able to, at my leisure, gather and meet at some of these meetings and learn some information. And I see that this is the way it's going to go, that we increase this, but I don't want us to lose that humanness touch. And so I don't know what the future holds. 2 years ago, if you said this is the situation we'd be in, I would have probably laughed or scoffed at you. So ham radio and ham radio enthusiasts are amateurs who adapt and overcome. And so I'm actually soliciting solutions and ideas and ways we can help one another to become to promote our club and not see our numbers diminish. And as a result of that, I think the other great challenge is, are we still going to be available to be hams? And I say that because the frequencies that we use are a finite resource, and we see the FCC continuing to sell off portions of different bands for other applications, commercial applications, I might add, where they're making a profit on it. Well, amateur radio has been a free service that we've been able to embrace and enjoy. And now with the new regulations, it's going to start costing us to get a license or an upgrade of your license or a change in your license. And those fees are a stumbling block to people like me who may be living on a fixed budget, and disabled people who, don't have those extra funds to invest in things like that. So we've written our letters and have appealed and getting politically active. So when I talk about my Pat's Ham Radio Accurate Weather and Science Club, or I talk about my Pat's Wheel of Fortune at Ham Radio Training Class, I'd like us to see us get 10 million, 20 million amateur radio operators here in the States to have that political voice to be able to say, okay, this is resources and we do need to support our club. And I give a shout out to the ARRL who are trying to hold the line and help us and advocate for us. And we need to help them more by supporting. And so I definitely am glad to invest, my resources in investing in not only the ARRL, but also in events like yours, Eric. And it's meaningful. It's not taken for granted. And I want everyone to know that when you do these things, it's folks like me that, nameless, faceless, that say gratefully, we thank you and respect your decision to try to help us. And so that's kind of my, passionate shout out. But with the new technologies coming out, we're going to see some amazing solutions to help people be able to live a higher quality of life and an independent lifestyle that was never before attained. And for that, I like to say that with people like you, Eric, I'm able to say I can virtually sit in the shadow of your greatness and let your shadow be able to make an imprint.
Oi, Pat, you're killing me here. Look, I appreciate the support. You're referring to the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo.
Yes.
I do have to say, though, that before the show I was speaking to you about, I actually grew up with people with disabilities, even hams with disabilities. And so I'm very sensitive to the fact that even though we had 7,000 people that bought tickets for the last expo, if there's 7 hams that don't have access to the presentations, that it was very important for me and my team that we actually created a video player that was capable of being keyboard controlled by blind hams. The other thing is, I think that virtual and live are going to be joined together. And it sounds to me like your radio club has already done this, and that you're doing hybrid meetings now so that people who are uncomfortable or incapable of coming to the live meeting, you can have a live meeting, but those people can be included. So I think that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to see a lot more integration of these technologies to be more inclusive. Before we go, let me ask you one last thing, and that is, do you have advice that you'd give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Absolutely. The first answer is thank you for wanting to get involved again because you recognize that it meets a need in your life, an interest, a passion, a hobby. And as you do not be afraid to reach out and ask to find out about a club or group in your area. The ARRL.org website has overwhelming amounts of information, including clubs, club locations, and some contact information. And there's a really wonderful website called QRZ.com. And on it is all kinds of information from different ham operators and that. So I give a shout out and say, make the contact, ask them, and ask it this way. Say something simply like, I'm really interested in getting involved again in ham radio. And are you interested or are you close by? And if not, can you suggest someone? And it usually takes a couple of 3 phone calls. That's what it took me up in Alaska to initially find a club. And once you did, I was able to meet up with a couple of ham radio operators who were gracious enough to pick me up and drive me to the meetings and do some activities. So don't be discouraged. Don't be negative. As in any microcosm, there will be people who may not want to be interested or bothered, but don't give up and keep going. And there are resources available. So if your only stumbling block is you don't have a radio, let us know. There are groups that can help support. A modest radio that's, less than the cost of a cell phone, definitely less than the cost of a smartphone or a computer or a video game can help you get on the air. And there's other resources available. So don't be discouraged. And if necessary, you can, send me an email, AK5TX at ARRL.net. or one of these other groups. Eric's group can definitely at least put you in contact with someone. So I like to say, make the call, send the email, and it's great because there's so much, not everything has been learned. There's so many new frontiers of activity that you might be the one to discover. And it would be a pleasure to say, I remember when they contacted us and we're interested in getting going again with ham radio. So keep on going.
Pat, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast, and wish you 73.
Thank you again, Eric. You have a great day, and the best to you and the team.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Patrick. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday and put in AK5TX in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.